Well, church, when I think about orphan and widow care, the image in my mind is the ocean, and we're jumping in to try to make a splash. It just seems so large and so massive to me. And really, if we're humanly speaking, a 2-week mini-series on orphan and widow care is pretty insignificant. Let's just be honest. Like, it's kind of like a weak swipe at widow and orphan care. But the way we do things here at Brook Hills is we take leaps of faith, allowing God to lead, and we just obediently proceed. Amen? That God says that this is something that we need to address and talk about, and so we step out in faith, and we are trusting God for revelations. So I'm not necessarily thinking that my words are going to convince you to do anything. It's going to be the Spirit of God that reveals to you that which He wants to say to you. It's the Spirit of God that will give us the road maps that we're to proceed on. It's the Spirit of God that will bring results in the area of orphan and widow care. And so I'm not afraid to jump in the ocean and try to make a splash, because that's what God told us to do. Amen? And so we step out in faith, in obedience, allowing God to bring the revelation, the road maps, and the results, because you know I love to speak in threes, and they all start with R, right? James 1:27. We began looking at it last week, and we said that again to this week we would be much more practical about it. But it says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after the orphan and the widow in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And so what we began talking about last week is this idea that James is clarifying a type of religion that is acceptable to God. And the assumption is, if there is a type of religion that is acceptable to God, there's probably something that's being passed off as religion that is unacceptable to God. And if you read the entire book of James, and specifically the first chapter of James, you see that in some ways he says that there are things that are being presented as religion that are actually foolishness and useless to God. And so in his description of this religion that is pure and undefiled, he gives two perfect demonstrations of this type of religion. And he says it's care for the orphan and the widow. But we said also that there's this interesting verb, this idea of looking after. And there's so much in that we began to kind of scratch the surface last week. This idea of looking after the widow and the is not some social visit or some do-goodedness. It's really this idea of looking upon, going to see, examining closely, inspecting, examining the state of affairs, overseeing. It's something that you engage and you invest. It's not something you simply just look and say, oh, okay, they look good and I'm out of here. There is an investment, there's an engagement, there's a consistent practice, a fundamental attitude that James is trying to establish in the hearts and the minds of his readers, not some isolated act of do-goodism. And I think where this began, because as I mentioned last week, there really isn't any other example of orphan and widow combined in the same topic, the same phrase or sentence or verse or subject in the New Testament. Really, the heart of them being linked together is found in the Old Testament much more extensively than in the New Testament. And the first reference of this is in Exodus chapter 22, verse 22. Now, as you read this, you see, if the thief is caught breaking in at night and struck the fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. It should be 22:22. Sorry, let me read it to you. That's 22:2, and I gave him the wrong thing. I'll read it to you. That's my fault. I'm going to get in trouble at home for that one. Yeah, we'll hear about that. Yikes. Here's what if I would have given the right information to our media team, it would say, do not take advantage of the widow or the orphan. Now you can applaud. There you go. So that's what it was supposed to say, and it's my fault that it doesn't say that. And so here's the thing that I want us to understand. Where this idea originally came from is that the Israelites, right, the chosen people of God, they were in bondage in Egypt, and you know Moses, right, let my people go, and they're released, and on their way to the promised land, between Egypt and the promised land, there's this 40-year roadblock detour thing, right? Well, in the process of that 40 years, some people die off. And so now we have these orphans, those who are without fathers. And now you have these widows, those without spouses or husbands. And God says, this is important to me, that these two special groups of people get cared for. And he doesn't just say it. He establishes laws to help people be aware and care for these needs. And so when James is picking up this theme of looking after, it really is its foundation is in the Old Testament. And do we have the other scriptures to share? Deuteronomy, look at some of these. Deuteronomy 10:18 says this. I hope I got all these ones right. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Psalm 83:2. See how your enemies growl, how your foes rear their heads. That's not it. That's bad. That's my fault too. Psalm 68:5. I actually do live with her. As a father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. And so we see this idea that the theme begins in Exodus, and really God is concerned about these two groups of people all the way through. Now here's where I struggle, and I'm going to be more than what I've already struggled with today. So I see this issue really as a pendulum, and I have to be really honest with you. So on one hand, I feel like we can swing the pendulum we spin, the pendulum can be the wrong direction. We need to admit that we have significant room for growth and improvement in these areas. We can't just say, you know what, it's being done, someone's taking care of it. We need to realize that there is an appropriate response. So doing nothing is the wrong end of the pendulum. Thinking that someone else is going to do something is the wrong end of that pendulum. But I believe the pendulum can swing the total other direction, where we feel like every widow is incapable of caring for themselves, and they should be our project as a church, and we proverbially just like pet them, right? Like, oh, I'm sorry about your loss, and we pet them. You know, so that's the pendulum's too far the other way. So that we somehow project that if you're not running out and adopting a kid, somehow your salvation is in question. You know, that the pendulum can swing way too far the other way, or one way or the other. And so we need to find what I believe is an appropriate biblical, practical response to God's concern for the orphan and the widow. And we showed you a video, that video that we showed in the beginning was produced by Hope for the Orphans. And I read this week, the founder of Hope for the Orphans said this: the church has the reach, the mandate, and the ability to minister to these special people. And I want you to hear that again. He didn't say the hospital, or the grocery store, or the pharmacy. He said the church. The church has the reach, the mandate, and the ability to minister to these people. And so one thing that I am convinced of, that beyond the family, God's plan for the widow and the orphan is the church. I cannot find any other evidence. And that may come as a shock, that may come as a disappointment, that may come as an exciting thing, but as we look at the scriptures and as we look at the need, I am convinced more than ever the church is God's plan for the widow and the orphan beyond the family. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'm trusting God to help us design and discern a plan to love the orphan and the widow. And so I think it involves these three things. I think it involves awareness, behavior, and commitment. And I didn't get that from anybody but me. I think that's really, if I try to boil it all down, what is the church's responsibility to the orphan and the widow? And beyond just kind of things that just kind of make us feel good or things that make you feel guilty, we're really down deep. What are the things that God expects from the church? And I think it's one thing is awareness, bringing the need before the people, highlighting really what the truth of the orphan and the widow in distress, the awareness, the behavior, that we actually do what we say and we say what we do, that there's action behind that awareness. And then C would be commitment, that we actually have a sustained commitment. It's not just a project for us. It's actually something that we have a sustained commitment to. So it's not just say, hey, we run a clothing drive or we highlight in a 2-week series foster care and adoption and we don't talk about it again. I believe there needs to be an awareness, and then there needs to be behavior behind that awareness, and then there needs to be this sustained commitment. And church, I believe it's not all or nothing. As the ladies spoke, it's not just either you go out and you and it's not just, okay, so it's not just building a mother-in-law suite. Like, okay, so my father-in-law passed away. So the options are do nothing or build a mother-in-law suite on your home. I don't think she likes me that much. So they're you know what I mean? So it's not either or. And you know what? She doesn't like you that much either. So it's not like, we only have two options, nothing or all the way. So it's nothing when you want to care for an orphan. It's not nothing or you put an extra wing on your home and you adopt 6 kids. It's not all or nothing. But what we cannot do is continue to be mediocre. My approach to the orphan and the widow has been mediocre. And I think that needs to change. I think it needs to press towards a biblical and practical response. Building bridges of hope. And I know that, again, that sounds cliche, but as I think about what does awareness, behavior, and commitment look like in reality, I think it's about bringing hope to those who are in distress. It's about bringing hope to those who have no hope. From wherever someone finds themselves and for however long they've been there, building a bridge of hope to them. How do we do that? Well, I said last week we're going to be much more practical, and here it is. As I think about what does the ministry to the orphan and the widow look like, I want you to hear me succinctly and clearly. James talks about distress, and I interpret distress to mean practical problems. So sometimes the word distress can be slippery. It's like, what does it mean to be in distress? And I want to just say it from this point of view. It may be more than this, but it's definitely this. Practical problems. Whatever the practical problems of the orphan and the widow are, we need to be addressing those. And so addressing the widow first. I think, church, if we're going to care for the widow in a practical and biblical way, we need to have sympathetic consciousness. And what I mean by that is we need to be listeners. Sympathetic consciousness. Be aware of their needs. Listening. Listeners are wanted. More than times than not, we need to be listened to. Building trust with one that they may have lost, the one that they trusted the most. We need to be building trust with those who have lost a loved one. How do we do that? How do we build trust with the one they trusted most is no longer present with them? Maybe an awareness of the family connectedness. One of the things that Nana and I were talking about last night is I think that one of the things that has made her journey through this maybe incrementally easier is because she's so connected to her children. And she has good relationships with her children. And you know what? That may not be the case with some other folks that have lost a loved one. And so as the church, because I said that beyond the church, beyond the family, the church is first up. We need to be aware of the family's connectedness. We need to be aware that if this person has lost a loved one, what is their support system? What are the relationships with their family like? Because if they don't have a strong relationship with their family, you're up. We need to be caring and listening and building trust. That's what I believe sympathetic consciousness is. How about empathetic sensitivity? We just yesterday had a meeting, and I was so blessed. We had 5 people interested in beginning a visitation ministry in our church. It was wonderful. I was grateful that we had 5 folks come out and truly want to be empathetic. They truly want to be sensitive to the needs of those that are hurting around them. And so we're trying to develop a visitation ministry where we can go and if we're not weekly making phone calls, but we're monthly making visits to people that are needing our help. Another way I think we care for the widow in a biblical and practical way is that we have actions towards alleviating distress. One of the things, and these are very, very practical, how about computer training for those who maybe have never used a computer? Helping them navigate the internet, tax help, carpooling, babysitting for young widows, yard work. Church, I think maybe what might be most important to us in caring for a widow is creating a culture of care and fellowship and support. Remembering anniversaries, holiday invitations. One of the things I feel like as I talk to widows this week and last couple of weeks is that one of the things that our heart needs to be about is helping them restore an unimpaired quality of life, regaining stability. That might involve financial support, social activities, or health and beauty concerns. We need to help them restore an unimpaired quality of life. And you know what? A lot of the widows that I talked to this week, they're doing great. But we need to be aware of those who maybe aren't. And I think that responsibility is the church's. Kind of finishing up my thoughts about the widow, and I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but the widower as well. I know that it says widow in here, but I believe that there is certainly, this ministry goes both to the male and female, that there is a need for care for the widower as well. But what I want us to say about this is the burden of the widow and the widower, that the burden the widow carries is fit for her or his shoulders alone. I think one of the mistakes that we think that we often make when we try to think about caring for the widow is that we feel like we have to carry their burden. And I don't think that's actually the case. I think as the church, we're called to come alongside of them and to support them and extend to them support. But that burden is only theirs to carry. Saying to a widow is, I understand, is maybe the worst thing that you can say. You don't understand. You cannot carry this burden. You do not know, unless you have lost a spouse, that burden that person carries. And so it may be more apt and more appropriate to say, I can't imagine, than I understand. Because if we say, I can't imagine the burden that you're carrying, at least you're identifying you realize that the depth of their pain. That you know that it's a deep pain, you don't understand it, but you understand that there's a depth to that pain. Telling them you understand may actually be one of the most untrue things that we could say. So I want to switch over to practical steps for orphan care. I think that orphan care is helping create forever families for all children. And I don't know exactly what that means. It may mean adoption, but it also may be praying for the orphan, crying out for someone, speaking up for them. You know, there's a whole system called court-appointed special advocates. There's people that stand in the gap for those who are neglected or abused. Maybe we need to look into these court-appointed special advocates. Maybe we can't have full-time care of a child, but we can stand in the gap for those who are being neglected, providing for their needs. I mean, as simple as school supplies for a foster child. Being aware of the needs around us. We mentioned this a little bit with this group, supporting those who are supporting the orphans. Maybe as a church, we're called to meet the needs of those who are meeting the needs of these children. Coming beside them and meeting needs, being practical. I think one of the ways that we can have orphan care and foster care and adoption care is protecting them from harm. You may not want to be a long-term foster care parent, but taking the classes so that you can be an emergency foster care placement, a weekend, a day, to get them to a more permanent place. Visiting them where they are, creating relationships with orphans and foster care families. Church, I want to bring this in for a landing, and I feel like I'm pretty disjointed here. I'm still trembling from that shock of the sound. Here's what I want to share with you today, and this is as practical as I can get. I believe that now is the time and the space where we have been called to enter into orphan and widow care. Is it too big of a vision to say that by 2017, no child needing foster care placement in the northern panhandle of West Virginia would need to leave Brooke County? Is that too big of a vision? That when there would be someone, Quintina gets a phone call at 5 minutes to 11, she doesn't have to call Parkersburg. Is that too big of a vision? We have one non-kinship, there's a phrase, non-family that will accept children right now, a foster child in Brooke County. That's wild. One. We have one family. So is it too big of a vision to say by 2017, no child needing foster care placement in the northern panhandle of West Virginia would need to leave the county that they live in? Is it too big of a vision to say that by 2016, every widow in our church, in our ministry circle of influence, would know that Brook Hills Free Methodist Church cares and has intentional ministries when and if they need them? We need to be about that. Is it too big of a vision to say that by November 8th, which is Orphan Sunday 2015, a handful of families in our church will have prayed, discerned, and begun the process of adoption? Is that too big of a vision? By November 8th, a handful of families in our church will have prayed, discerned, and began the process. Is it too big of a vision that by 2016, BHFNC is seen as the mouth of a mighty river of adoption in our community? I'm not saying that we will be the one that we will have the church that adopts the most kids. I'm saying that the line is not very long for people standing up for those that need adopted and foster care. And so I believe as a church, we need to step up and get in line. Is it too big of a vision that each one of us weekly has widow care? You call a widow, you visit a widow, you hug a widow. Is that too much to ask? Every week you find one and you do widow care. We're beginning next week. For those who are interested in widow, or not widow, but in orphan and adoption and foster care, we're beginning a small little class. And it's going to be happening at 9:15 on Sunday mornings. And it's going to just, as we said, just cultivate this spirit of interest in adoption and foster care. And so if you're interested in that, we want to definitely help you just have that discussion. We have some ladies coming in that are going to facilitate the course. And we want, if you have interest in that, mark that on your connection card before you turn it in today, and let us know that you're interested in that, and we'll be in contact with you.